Welcome, my constant reader friends. I'm Tad, and this is Tad Reads Books and Stuff. So, as promised, today we're going to be discussing the Silmarillion and some JRR Tolkien stuff. But first, let me just run through real quick, an update like I normally do. So, I am still in the process of reading The Expanse. This is number 2, Caliban's War. What am I here? 200 pages in, 600 pages in this book. I'll be finishing it next week, a little bit thereafter. We'll finish it before the end of the month. And I'm also reading Stephen King, Billy Summers. Also, 179 pages into the book. Oh my gosh. I don't want this channel to become Stephen King all the time. He is my favorite, all-time favorite author, and I do discuss his books a lot. Why I haven't read this yet? I got it right when it first came out. For whatever reason, I want to I guess I want to read other things. I just started this, again, 179 pages in, and oh, it's freaking awesome. I'm really liking it. I don't know where they're going to go from here. It seems like the whole story's already over, but anyways, we'll finish that before the end of the month. All right, so on to the Silmarillion. Real quick, the Silmarillion, this is the volume I was reading, my Folio Society volume of the Silmarillion. So, the Silmarillion is basically a novel that was edited by Christopher Tolkien and Guy Kay. Now, what they did was, of course, they took the existing tome of writings of JRR Tolkien, notes and all kinds of stuff, and kind of edited it together to do the Silmarillion. Now, what is it? Is it short stories, novellas, a historical novel for Middle-earth? Basically, a little of all of it, I guess. But down to brass tacks, the Silmarillion has, I'm going to take it out of the slipcover, keep it out, set this down here. So it basically has 5 books in this novel. The first 2 are the creation of the universe. The next book, the third book, is by far the biggest portion of the novel. I mean, it's 24 chapters in this third book, and it tells the story of the Silmarils, of course, where they get the name Silmarillion. However, in those 24 chapters, really, there's very little about the Silmarils. I mean, there's always something going on with them, but there's I don't know what you want to call it, side quests and things all over the place, discussing those. Then the final 2 books are basically the coming of man to Middle-earth and this universe. So, is this a history book or, like I said, short stories or something? Really, it is. It's really it's hard for me. When I first started hearing about JRR Tolkien, I don't know if you all remember, there was this little cartoon of the Lord of the Rings, and it was I don't think it was really that well done. But I saw it when I was a kid, so I was aware of J.R.R. Tolkien. Of course, I'm a reader, and I loved fantasy and things like that. I was really into Terry Brooks. But around the time I graduated, I went in the military, went in the Air Force. I said, I really want to start reading J.R.R. Tolkien. I asked some people, where should I start? And of course, people were giving me various books to start, and just me, I guess being me, I wanted to start at the beginning. I said, well, I really want to start at the beginning. So somebody said, well, then you want to read the Silmarillion, because the Silmarillion takes place before the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit. So I said, oh, wow, then I'll get the Silmarillion. So what I did was I went and I got this. This is my original version of the Silmarillion, 1984. I start reading this book, and holy crap, it's hard to get through. The old English style of writing, and just the sheer names and places, very many of, at my early age in 84, really couldn't pronounce half the names in here. Just the relationships all over the place. And it, to me, was just a history book. So, is this, I'm going to do it. Is this? Well, besides the fact that this pompous ass, George R.R. Martin, of course, I don't know why he just didn't go by JRR Martin, because he so much wants to copy JRR Tolkien, obviously. He's made an effort in his world to follow Mr. Tolkien, I guess. So he made his history book, which I told you before, I think is total crap. It's just a way to get us to the stories of, the Game of Thrones series, and where the Targaryens are and why there aren't any dragons and stuff like that. I did a whole video on this. You can go look at. This is crap. We're going to get rid of this. This isn't. This is, yes, it's a history, but it's told in a prose that is beautiful. And it is told in series of stories. Now, yes, Christopher Tolkien and Guy Kay edited it to make it, I guess, flow easier. It does start, like I said, book 1, 2, and 3, the creation of the universe. So it is in a chronological order, but it's just, I don't know, it's more beautiful. I don't want to be flippant, but it's just written much better than that George R.R. Martin piece of crap. Because it is stories, so it's more fleshed out, I think, and it leads you on this path. Now, I'm not gonna lie, is this book, I'm gonna set this one down, is this book hard to read? Yeah, I still think it is. Upon reading it now again, it is different, and I had the similar reading experience this time as I did when I read it the first time. I kind of forced myself to power through specifically the beginning, the first three books, because again, tons of names, tons of places. It's really weird. So in the first 3 books, you've got the creation of the universe by the One, multiple names, but basically we're just going to say the One. So he creates these 15 beings that are gods in themselves, or angels, angelic, the masters of the universe. So there's 15 of them. Oh my gosh, the names, I'm not going to go through them. But so in these 15 beings, probably the most important one is Melkor. Now, Melkor kind of just turns to the dark side and becomes the evil of the universe. And Melkor is a jerk. Well, he does all kinds of cool stuff. But one of the things that he does is he corrupts some of these other beings, and he makes them into different creatures that are nasty in the universe, like the Balrogs and Sauron. So as you're reading, you're going to be introduced to names that you're familiar with from Lord of the Rings as it continues. But I thought that was pretty cool. So Melkor's evil, and so he's doing his nefarious evil stuff. All right, next. Okay, so then Elue, I believe that's how you say his name. He was actually one of the original 15 super beings, angels. Kind of gets bored. They've been expecting the coming of some more races, like elves and men eventually. But Elue gets bored, so he goes ahead and creates the dwarves. So now we got the dwarves, and they're populating the universe, and more stories evolve. I can't do it justice. I can't tell you everything. I'm not going to. But so then finally the elves are created. The elves start populating, of course, the universe. There are basically 3 different types of elves at this point. I'm not going to name them. You could go through, and they have different characteristics and have their own little stories. But then Melkor comes back onto the scene, and he takes some of these elves and captures them, makes them captive, and turns them into orcs. So now we've got, of course, we've got all kinds of stuff now. We're starting to slowly build, this universe that we are familiar with. You've got Balrog, Sauron, elves, dwarves, and it just, the third book is the longest, like I said, part of the story. And there's tons of side quests and people going on, and people killing themselves, committing suicide, people getting thrown off the mountains. Just, you have to read it, but I'm just giving you an overview. So now we're into book 3, and this is really where you start seeing the creation of the Silmarils. And what their purpose was, they took the energy of these 2 trees that were created that Melkor destroyed. Anyway, so now we've got these Silmarils, and they're important, but like I said, there really isn't a lot really that the Silmarils do that you see, except for everybody wants them. So what does Melkor do? Of course, Melkor steals them, and he creates this necklace and installs them in the necklace, and he runs away. He runs away to Middle-earth, where now they've been populating these people. So the dwarves are there. Now the elves get pissed off because Melkor stole the Silmarils, and so they're following Melkor into Middle-earth. Melkor now becomes known as Morgoth. Again, more changes in names. So they follow Morgoth into Middle-earth, and they actually join forces with the dwarves. They're friendly with the dwarves, and they're using the dwarves to help them track down Morgoth and try to get the Silmarils. Well, there's other stories we can go into where they actually get, one of the Silmarils does get stolen, but because they're not really meant for people, it corrupts pretty much people that they come in contact with it. But all right, so you get away from that. So now we're into, again, that's a long 24 chapter section of the novel. Now we get into books 4 and 5. Books 4 and 5 are finally the coming of man. Now, at first, when the men show up, the elves just really don't know what to think of them. Men can die of old age. I mean, the elves didn't die of old age. Men could get diseases and get sick and die. Elves don't get sick and die. I mean, the elves can die, absolutely, by physical means. You can physically kill an elf, but they're just not going to die because of old age or get sick. And they're kind of not understanding these men. Well, some men do make breaches and get to become familiar with the elves. and they slowly start to become friends with men. Some men, even that live with the elves or real close to the elves, start living longer lives. They kind of take on some of these characteristics from the elves. And then there starts to become some intermingling between the elves and men, and they have children and things like that. But now we're into the second age of the universe, and now you're going to start seeing even more names that you're familiar with, places that you're familiar with. So the fourth and fifth book, I would say, are probably a little bit more easy to read than, of course, the first three books. As you go through these books, I think it gets a little bit more easier for us to read because we become more familiar with the world. I'm not going to go too much into books 4 and 5 in the Coming of Men, but that is the period where we come to the making of the rings. So there's like 20 rings. Some of them go to humans, some of them go to the elves, some go to the dwarves, and Sauron creates the One Ring. And that's now where we're starting to really get into what we know of the Lord of the Rings. And I'm not going to say too much of that beyond that. So, do I suggest that you read this book? Well, absolutely, you have to read the book, but this is what I'm going to suggest to you. I made a mistake by reading this book first. I really do believe so, because it was so hard for me to get into and it took so long. I really had to slog through it. I did, like I said, I really do not DNF books, so I finally made it through that old paperback version of mine and made it through there. But I'm going to suggest that first, this is my opinion, you all can vary however you want. I'm going to say definitely read The Hobbit first. It is probably the book that I have read the most in my life. I've read this book, at least I can count 7 times. I've read a lot of other books multiple times. My favorite books, It and Dune and Tad Williams and Terry Brooks. I've read them 3-4 times. I've read The Hobbit 7 times. This is just one of the all-time best books. It's just so cinematic, and it really gets you into the world. So, yes, let's start with The Hobbit. I would suggest starting with The Hobbit. Now you've kind of, seen how he writes, Mr. Tolkien, and his kind of old school English, but it's not too hard to get past. Now you're a little excited. You've seen the world. Very fun, fast, easy book to read. Then what I would do is pick up the Silmarillion and maybe start just reading a couple of the books. Start with the first book, second book. It's not going to put you off too much. Don't think that you have to read this book from cover to cover. So read a couple books, the first 2 or 3. If you can get through the first 3, that'd be great. Then I would go on to The Fellowship of the Ring, okay, the first book in the trilogy. And now you're more immersed into the world. You're becoming more and more familiar with, the dwarves and the halflings and the men and the orcs, and then maybe go back and read the Silmarils, read the 3rd book. I think it's just going to be easier for you to digest that way. Then I'd go, of course, and I'd read The Two Towers, and maybe even go right on to the Return of the Kings, or again, supplement between these books with some more stories, maybe the Coming of Men, books 4 and 5. So that way you can piece through the Silmarillion, and I think it can help inform you as you're reading through these, and just make the whole universe so dense and thick and enjoyable that way. Instead of, I know a lot of people will say just read The Hobbit, then read these, then read the Silmarillion. Yeah, of course you could do it that way, but I think by parsing it out and reading it as like filler in between the other books is really the way to go. That's my suggestion. Take it or leave it, but that's what I would do. Now, after that, what do you want to do? There are now, of course, other books. Now, I'm going to show you a couple that I have here. I do have the Book of Lost Tales. This is part 1, and I've got the Book of Lost Tales part 2. These are really the history of Middle Earth by Christopher Tolkien. And again, it's more edited material that he has gone through his father's stuff and found just, of course, reams and reams and tomes of information that JRR Tolkien has left behind. The history of Middle Earth, there's 12 volumes in that series, that group called The History of Middle Earth. And it's a lot. These, I'm not going to even suggest that you read these. You don't have to at all to enjoy the world of JRR Tolkien, for sure, because the thing with these stories, the history of Middle Earth, is these are all just, like I said, from writings from JRR Tolkien, where he is, I think, really experimenting and developing this whole universe in his head, because there are a lot of the information in these books, the history of Middle Earth, change. He may be talking about this elf in these books, and it totally morphs into somebody else when it comes out in the stories, in the world. Areas, locations, themes, stories change tremendously from what these books, but they do give you, if you want to be, if you want to study JRR Tolkien and become a scholar in Middle Earth, yeah, then you'll want to read those, because you can kind of see his thought patterns and how he got to where he got to at the end. But really, I mean, unless you're going to become a scholar, I don't even know if I would even suggest actually reading them. That may be blasphemous to some of you that are JRR Tolkien fans, but you definitely don't need it. Now, a lot of other things have come out, of course, since then. A book series called The Unfinished Tales, and story of Tom Bombadil. Those are great reads. Those are more along, a storyline that you're going to be familiar with, other than the history of Middle Earth. So definitely, if you want to continue reading, that's a good place to go. The Unfinished Tales and the Tales of Tom Bombadil. But now they're coming out with these new books, and this is the one I have, the first one that came out. Again, it says JRR Tolkien, edited by Christopher Tolkien, with illustrations by Anne Lee. This is The Children of Hurin. Now, basically, these newer books that are coming out are pretty much stories from the Silmarillion, expanded, made into, a full novel-sized story. Very interesting. I have not read this yet. I'm interested to. I'm curious if this new TV series is going to just kind of go through different stories in the Silmarillion, or if they're going to use maybe like these types of books where they're going to tell the story of the Children of Hurin and expand it and go that way. I'm not sure. I'm not really studying up on it, because I want to be pleasantly surprised when I start watching this in a couple weeks. I think it's like 2 weeks it's going to be coming out. So there's the Children of Hurin, and I wrote a list here. I don't have these other ones, but there is the Fall of Gondolin, and there is the Fall of Numenor. So again, more fleshed out stories from the Silmarillion. So I mean, that's my take on it. I mean, you can, believe me, read it yourself. When I read it the first time, I'm going to give you some advice. Just read it. Read through it, and you're going to get confused and tossed about a little bit, but when you're finished, then it kind of tells this overall story that you go, oh, okay, I can see the whole thing now, and you can see how it leads in, of course, to the Lord of the Rings novels. But don't be afraid of it. I know I have friends. I'm serious. I have friends who just have heard so many horror stories about trying to slog through the Silmarillion that they won't even give it a chance. Give it a chance. Take your time with it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at, as you read, it kind of starts falling together, and it can be enjoyable. But like I said, if you want to do it an easier way, I think, is read The Hobbit, then read a couple books in here, then read the Fellowship of the Ring, then read a couple books. Kind of go like that as an in-between filler for the whole series, and then you'll be able to get through it, and I think it will help you enjoy it even more. All right, so that's my story. I'm sticking to it. That's how I am suggesting that you proceed with Silmarillion. If you have any other ideas, any other suggestions, any other thoughts, of course, please make some comments on my videos. I love the comments. If you found any entertaining value in this channel, please like and subscribe. I would appreciate it very much. Next week, I don't know, I think we'll be done with either Billy Summers or Calvin's War, and we'll probably discuss those and start talking about maybe what we're going to read during Sci-Fi September. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Peace out.